Hi, I'm Brendan Granger, your technology concierge, and today I'm joined by Doron Danon from Smart Hotel Solutions, and we're talking about energy management. Hi, Doron. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Brendan?
Very good, thank you. Very good. Great to have you here. In a couple of sentences, can you sort of describe what a guest room energy management system is for us?
Yes. So a guest room energy management system is a system which takes over room devices when the rooms are unoccupied
Okay.
for the purposes of saving energy. The main components or the main devices that energy management systems take control of are basically HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems,
Yes.
as that is really the major power device in the room, and guest room lights. These days, lights are not too much of an issue because most modern globes in hotel rooms are LED driven, which are very low wattage.
Yeah.
But your heating and cooling systems are your main power or energy consumers in the room. So that is the purpose of an energy management system, is to take control of those devices when no one is in the rooms and be able to fully control them for the purposes of cutting up the energy wastage when the rooms are vacant.
And does the system necessarily turn everything off, or there are other options that a hotel can choose?
That's a good question, Brendan. So generally speaking, that will depend on the hotel and how they want to set it up. So yes, you can turn things completely off. So normally lights are normally turned off, because if there's no one in the rooms, there's no point in having lights on. So lights are normally turned off. The on the HVAC side, on the heating and cooling side, the most aggressive form of energy management is obviously to turn things off. But what we have found from our experience over the years is that there's always a balance between guest comfort and energy management. And many energy management systems these days, especially the ones that we support, like the ecosystem, have the ability to do temperature setbacks. So you don't actually have to turn things completely off, and you can sort of maintain a temperature setback. That'll depend, again, on a few factors. Depends on the climate conditions of the hotel, and that may vary between summer and winter, and of course where the hotel or resort is located. And that will also depend on the guest, on the management of the hotel, and what is their outlook on energy management. Most hotels in a moderate type climate environment like to have things off completely, but more five-star or luxury type hotels in more extreme climate conditions, for example, if it's very hot or very cold weather, they prefer to have temperature setbacks, which would then keep rooms still save energy, but not turn things off completely, and still keep a level of comfort for when guests do return back into rooms.
What is it that guests love about energy management?
Okay, so basically what guests love about energy management systems, and we're referring to specifically guest room energy management systems, is that these type of systems actually work in a fully automatic way in the background. And in fact, most guests don't even know that there's such systems are in place.
Okay.
And that's actually one of the main things guests love about it, is that things just work in an automatic way and they don't even know about it. So for example, in the old days or in the past, there was those type key card type systems.
Yep.
Where guests enters into rooms and they had to put in their cards, stumble in the dark looking for the slot. These days you don't need that. The guest just opens the door, lights turn on automatically, air cons are automatically turned on, and it's really a pleasure for the guests. So guests, as I said, they like that automation.
Yep.
Number one. And number two, they like to know, or they like to not know, that there's something working in the background. and if the guests don't even know that something's taking control of their guest room devices, that actually makes the guests happy, and they like that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. What is it that hotel management like about an energy management solution, Doron?
Well, the best thing that they like is that it reduces their costs. Bottom line, that is the ultimate goal of that. But also, as I explained, it's yes, it is the main reason of energy management is to reduce your costs, your energy costs, but also to keep the guests happy. Okay, so there's no point in cutting costs if your guests are not going to be happy. So you need to have you need to strike that correct balance, and any good energy management system will always strike that correct balance. So you need to address the issue of cutting costs. You need to address the issue of the correct balance of reducing energy but not affecting the guest comfort. And of course, you need to also look at the costs of investment of the system, and we can talk about that later on. And that depends on the type of energy management system you're putting in, and of course specific property construction or property building issues that is in each individual property. Yeah.
Doron, what sort of hotels are putting energy management solutions in now?
Okay, we're actually finding pretty much all hotels are actually it's becoming a standard in all hotels, especially new hotels that are being built. It's part of the building code, and pretty much everyone is spec'd up. But pretty much your corporate city type hotels, your resort holiday type hotels, pretty much all hotels have to have it. Unfortunately, energy costs are increasing across the board, and there doesn't seem to be any way of reducing energy costs, or energy costs are not really becoming cheaper over time. In fact, they're becoming more and more expensive over time. And yeah, and it's pretty much all hotels these days have to think along the lines of having an energy management system. Long are the days of the old key card system. Those are not elegant any longer. And for various reasons, hotels want automation. Everything needs to be automatic, and they need to cut out the financial risk of having devices left on when rooms are vacant.
Doron, is an energy management system difficult to implement, and when would be the best time to implement it?
Okay, so that will depend specifically on the property and what they're looking to do, and of course on the energy management system itself. Now, there are various energy management systems available out there. From the very basic ones, like we normally sell the ones that we support, the ecosystem ones, which are very, very easy to implement and install. We have a couple of versions. We have from our basic wireless version, which can actually take up to 1 hour to install in a particular hotel room. Then we have the hardwired systems, and then we have the more fancy, depending if they want to replace their controllers, or if they want to have anything networked back to a central PMS or a BMS system. So it all depends what the hotel wants to achieve. Now, generally speaking, if it's a new constructions or a refurb project are generally easier, because there you can install the more complicated ones. But if it's an existing hotel that's running, and they're just looking to implement a energy management system without actually going through a refurb process, or of course it's not a new construction because it's an existing hotel, and in fact they're actually looking not to shut down the hotel during such a project, they can actually very easily achieve that with the ecosystem wireless, where such installations can take not more than 1 hour per room. And in fact, we've had some situations where hotels have actually installed such systems even while housekeepers are actually cleaning the rooms,
right?
Where installation teams have followed the housekeepers, and maybe it takes about 1 hour, 1.5 hours at the most, and guests leave the room in the morning, come back in the afternoon, and they don't even know that an energy management system has actually been installed in their rooms.
Right.
So
Okay.
it all depends on what they're looking for. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Killing two birds with one stone. I like it.
Right.
Is it expensive to install an energy management system?
Okay, so that's a very good question, and many hotels obviously are always asking that question.
Mm.
Now, the what you actually need to look at is not the actual expense itself, but the return on investment. That is the key for any hotel decision to decide. So there's no such thing as expensive. It's basically return on investment.
Mm.
Um, what we generally find is that um, from basic energy management systems, and then that'll depend obviously on the cost of power, the cost of energy a hotel is paying, the climate conditions of the hotel or where are they located. That generally the return on investment we look at is around 2 to 4 years. Now, 2 to 4 years is actually very, very good investment or return on investment, where you would invest in something, you would reduce your energy expenses, and the reduction in energy expenses would then actually pay for the equipment itself, and you would get your money back in 2 years. We've had a situation in an extreme situation where a hotel was paying very, very high cost of power. They were in a regional town. They were in extreme climate condition, very hot conditions, and they were using very, very high energy consuming aircon systems, which were consuming a lot of power. When they implemented the ecosystem solution, and they basically reduced, in that particular hotel, they reduced their, they couldn't switch things off because they were in a hot environment. But what they did is they basically reduced their setbacks. Guests were leaving rooms on at 21, 22 degrees, and they basically increased that to like 23 or 24 degrees.
Yep.
So they kept their rooms, when the guest was out of the rooms were kept at around 23, 24 degrees. And just that 2 degree difference in the cooling side of things, because they were in an extreme climate condition and paying a very high cost of power, they actually got their money back in 6 months.
Wow.
Okay.
Okay.
So in that case, that's sort of an ideal situation, but not all hotels are in the luxury position of having such high cost of power and such extreme climate conditions. So that's why we say on average we say it's about 2 to 4 years,
Yep.
and that will depend on the various factors. So to answer your question, you should ask the hotels, is it reasonable to get a 2 to 4 year return on investment, and not is it expensive? What we also found is that there are other types of systems which are much more expensive, but the actual reduction in savings doesn't change.
Yes.
So sometimes it's better off for a hotel to go for a basic energy management system, without the fancy bells and whistles. As long as they achieve the reduction in energy costs, that'll give them the best bang for their buck by reducing the energy costs with a minimum investment, maximizing their return on investment.
That makes sense. It's just like a car.
Absolutely.
It's still going to get you from point A to point B, and it's going to use the same amount of petrol. So, yep, that makes sense. I heard somewhere too, Doron, that for every degree that you can reduce the HVAC, there's about a 10% saving. So as you said, taking it from 21 in that example up to 23, makes a 20% saving in energy. So quite significant.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Our general rule of thumb is that by having an energy management system in place, if a hotel has not had an energy management system in place before, you pretty much can reduce your HVAC. And again, we focus on HVAC because that's the main power consumption of any hotel, anywhere between 30 to 50% in reduction of cost. And that equates to anywhere between 10 and 30% reduction in your HVAC energy consumption.
Doron, what should a hotel look for when choosing an energy management solution?
Okay, so what they need to look for is the following. First of all, how easy is it to install such a system? And as I explained, we have various with the ecosystem. You've got your basic wireless, which can retrofit pretty much into any HVAC system. They need to do that. A lot of what I experienced we've had with hotels is that before they actually implement such systems, they actually should be installing what they call a trial or a mock-up room of that. That gives the hotel the opportunity, first of all, not only to experience the system firsthand, but also to actually see what's involved in installation. Because, you know, a lot of the times, okay, we'll install it, that's fine, but they don't actually understand what's involved. They actually have to go through the process. Normally, these type of systems are installed by qualified trade people, such as HVAC contractors or sparkies, electricians,
Yep.
and they then need to get those type of people in and actually do the installation. We give them a lot of advice. We normally propose to them how they should be installing it. We look at the components, and then they need to actually do an installation, and that'll give them ultimately what's involved, what are the costs. So those are the things they should be looking for. They should be looking for systems that do not interfere with guests. And as I said, the main thing is the rule of thumb is that guests actually, if they can achieve that guests don't even know there's an energy management system in place, that's a good rule of thumb. Because if that gets achieved, then you know the hotel knows they've got a good energy management system in place. You know, that they know that things work automated in the background without even guests knowing that these things are at work.
Yep. Fantastic. Thanks, Doron. I think there are a lot of misconceptions around energy management. The one that I've heard most often from hotels is that, you know, if the guest is a very light sleeper, then the system's going to turn itself off in the middle of the night. How would you answer that one?
Okay. Yes, that's a very, very common question, and that's probably 99% of the questions we get asked from hotels. Now, basically, to answer that question, any good energy management system, the rule of thumb is that an energy management system should not interfere at all when guests are in the rooms.
Yep.
Energy management systems only take over, or only are meant to be working when the rooms are vacant. So a good energy management system has to have the ability to determine when someone is in the rooms and when the rooms are totally empty without any guests. That is the key to any energy management system. So that is a very, very important point. So when you achieve that, now, for example, the ones we sell are the ecosystem. We achieve that by having a combination of a door sensor and a motion sensor.
Okay.
We've come across a lot of energy management systems out there which just only have a motion sensor only. Those are no good. You have to have a very, very good system in detecting when rooms are empty and when rooms are occupied by guests. Once you've achieved that objective, then there's absolutely no issues that when the guest is in the room, we don't interfere, or an energy management system should not interfere at all with the guest operation. Guests can put on their own temperatures. They can switch things on and off as they please. They can go to sleep. They can do whatever they need to do in the rooms. And energy management systems should not interfere at all when guests are in the rooms. And they're only meant to take over or take control of devices when rooms are totally vacant, when there's no one in the rooms.
Understand. So I think in summary, what you're saying is that with a good system, the door sensor detects if somebody has entered the room or exited the room. In conjunction then with the motion sensor, it actually identifies there's someone in the room. And if it does, it says the room is occupied. When that room is occupied, then the system doesn't have any control over the HVAC. Guest has full control, you know, setting the temperature to whatever they want. And as you said, it doesn't matter how light a sleeper they are, because the room is occupied and the energy management system doesn't have any control, then there's no way it would turn off.
Yes, absolutely right. So basically, yeah, absolutely right. So once the door, so basically the door always triggers everything to come on, and it then triggers the motion sensors to look for motion. at the same time. So if, for example, a guest walks into the room, everything will be turned on as soon as the door gets opened. And because they've walked into the room, the motion sensor would have picked them up. And there's normally a time delay. So we normally set it anywhere between 10 and 30 minutes. And within that 10 or 30 minutes, the motion sensor would have definitely picked up the guest. And then it latches the room into occupied room mode because the guest is in the room now. So once it's in occupied room mode, everything is normal for the guests, and the guests, the energy management system does not take control of the devices. The devices are left to work as normal as if there was no energy management system in place. So it doesn't interfere. And when a guest leaves the room, so when a door gets used again, it'll trigger the system to check if there's somebody in there. And if it doesn't detect any motion within that predetermined timer period, then the system would be confident to know that the rooms are vacant, and only then would it take control and do whatever needs to be done when the rooms are vacant. And as I explained, it could either be set to be switched off completely, or to be doing a temperature setback on the HVAC side, depending how the hotel wants it set up and what they're looking for in the form of energy savings.
Fantastic. Thank you for clarifying that. That's always, as I said, a question that hotels ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Doron, any final words of advice for a hotel looking at an energy management solution?
Yes. So look, the main thing is always look for your bang for your buck. There are so many energy management systems out there, lots of bells and whistles, but at the end of the day, do these bells and whistles actually save you money? So that's what the hotels should be looking at. As I explained, it's always about return on investment. How much do they invest? What do they save? And not interfering with the guest's operation. In other words, letting the guests have full control of devices when the guests are in the rooms, and keep it simple. Keep it simple is the rule, as we know from many years of experience. The more complicated systems are out there. Yes, you can get network systems, BMS systems, and those are all perfectly good and fine. And especially if it's a new construction process or a refurb process. But if it's an existing hotel that's just looking to reduce the energy costs, looking for a good return on investment, but needs an energy management system, that's an important part they need to look at. What is out there and how do they achieve that?
Doron, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Brendan. You're welcome.
As we've just heard from Doron, energy management systems are not as expensive or as difficult to implement as you would think. And the payback period, given that energy prices are rising, is somewhere between 2 and 3 years for a normal hotel. If you're in an extremely hot condition, payback periods can be considerably less than that. The best time to install a solution is when you're going through a refurbishment. You can retrofit at other times as well, but during a refurbishment, it's the most convenient. One of the biggest misconceptions that we hear with regards to energy management solutions is that if the guest is a really light sleeper, the system is going to turn off and the guest is going to obviously complain about that. With all of the modern systems on the market, that is not an issue. Once the guest is in the room is what we call occupied, and the guest has full control over the system. It will not turn itself off, regardless of how much a light sleeper that particular guest is. Like everything, the whole area can be a little bit complex. So if you've got any questions, you'd like further information, you want to bounce some ideas off me, please feel free to make contact. If you visit our website, you can actually book a complimentary, no strings attached consultation with me. Thank you. Look forward to talking to you soon.